Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are based in the world. My name is Ted Giletti. I'm a first-year student here at Tuck. And on behalf of the Center for Private Equity and Venture Capital, we'd like to welcome you to the conference today and to the Breakthrough in Protein panel. So thank you for joining us. In terms of the schedule for this panel, I'll leave about 5 to 10 minutes for questions at the end. So you can use the function towards the bottom of your screen where you can just ask a question and write your question in there. So introducing the panelists today. So we have a great lineup. Firstly, Dr. Zafer Bashi. He's with McKinsey in their ACRE institutes. And he helped to write a lot of the research on proteins that you may have read there. We're also joined by 2 PhDs who are with Big Idea Ventures, and they're food scientists there. So that's Dr. Dalal AlGhawas and Dr. Matthew Zhao. So really pleased to have you. Thanks for joining us today. So maybe we could just start by giving the audience a bit of background on what are the developments in technology that have allowed for the growth in plant-based foods, and a little bit more specifically around the extrusion process. So I don't know, Matthew, if you could maybe take that one, just to give the audience a bit more background into what is the process in actually making these new plant products.
All right. Thank you so much. And also thank you for getting me and Dalal on board here to share about some of the technology in plant-based protein. So basically, extrusion has been quite a developed technology that's been used in the food industry. So it's widely used for cereals, even pasta and stuff. So recently using plant protein is quite as the ingredient feed is quite commonly as well. So they produce, in Asia, they've been using texturized plant protein very often by using dry extrusion. So they use extruder to produce the TVP, called the texturized vegetable protein. So they can come from soy protein, pea protein mix, and then they go through the extrusion process where the protein is under the high shear rate. So they share the exposed to a high shearing rate on the protein, and subsequently produce a texturized meat analog. So in the Asian side, we typically use the dry extrusion where the product is typically dry, whereas recently products coming up with using a high moisture extrusion. So high moisture extrusion will come up with products that have the texturized, they have a texture that's quite similar to a meat analog. And this is commonly found in your plant-based patty. If you have seen it in the common market, those plant-based patty, like it's from Impossible patty, the Beyond Meat, and subsequent plant-based patty. So these are something that using a high moisture extrusion to achieve the protein texture that you have seen in the market.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And maybe just in terms of how that process could evolve going forward, we've seen some players in the industry using, for instance, a 3D printer with some extrusion technology. Do you think that could be a bigger option going forward, or will it still primarily be this more industrial kind of machines that are doing it?
Yes, that's true. I've seen some 3D printing. Using a shearing 3D printer to print a product out. So typically a 3D printer is like a mini extruder or extrusion. So the products will go through a high shear process to produce the product. So typically a good advantage of using a 3D printer to do the extrusion is you can form the shape that you want and also the dimension that you want. So you can use the 3D printer to customize the shape and to print the probably a piece of meat based on the ingredients that they use, rather than extrusion, because a typical extrusion you have the die, and they based on the die, the shape and size of the die to produce the specific size of your extrudate, which is the meat analog. So it's good to have 3D printing where you can use a small device to print out the customized shape and size that you want. But my concern is how can we bring this to be a more commercial scale, because 3D printer are typically single unit, and then they print it according to the dimension that you produce or you customize it. But the question for my case is how can we make it into a more commercial way where you have to print a massive amount of product, and also we have to be very specific on the ingredients to put it into the machine so that they can extrude out the shape and size you want. Because you 3D print a product that is three-dimensional, you have to make sure that when you print it out, the material is quite stable, and also to build the height accordingly. So if the product is not stable, probably it will collapse, and then the whole shape and size is not exactly what you would like to look at. So typically, I would say it's very tricky, but I like the way it's very customizable. But then in terms of that, the upscale is not as convenient as extrusion, where it's a very continuous process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think just to build on what Matthew has been putting, it's quite a bit of the extrusion, the purpose of it and what it helps with is really the texture piece. But I think that also the flavor profile has been improving in the alternative protein space, as well as some of the optical elements. So, for example, if you look at the Impossible Burger and their use of the heme molecule to mimic blood, is a key technological advantage that allowed that burger to really take a dominant position in the market. And reduction of that beanie flavor from pea protein or soy protein is also, I think, becoming much more attainable, and that's helping products like the Beyond Burger, in addition to the texture work that is all driven by the extrusion process.
Yeah, I think to add as well, definitely there's a lot of extensive research on the functionality of new sort of plant proteins, as well as their protein extracts. So, these technologies have been commonly available, but there's a huge drive at really understanding how these proteins function and how a lot of their properties can be very similar to, let's say, animal proteins. So animal protein properties, for instance, with eggs. So their emulsifying capacity, their binding capacities. Companies are finding ways to really understand how some plant proteins can be modified with science and technology to really, be on par and be equally, let's say, as functional as animal proteins.
Got it.
Very interesting. Mixing multiple types of proteins to deliver that effect from different sources to make sure that you get the balance right. So some of the products on the market, and I'm talking about the alternative protein space in general, we use a mix of fungal protein with an egg white to get to a texture that meets the specifications that they're trying to go for.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now maybe pivoting a little bit to the landscape for plant proteins out there currently, and maybe Zafer, you could just give a bit of an overview in terms of what are the different plant-based sources of protein currently, and where do you see trends for those going? Do you see perhaps insect protein or microalgae becoming more popular over time? Maybe we could start there.
Yeah, for sure. So I think if we are to look at the plant protein landscape, we can say the dominant sources of protein are three. The biggest one is soy protein, and that is followed by pea protein, and then followed is gluten. So soy protein is, I think, 2x to 3x basically the size of pea protein, and it is the largest market share in the alternative protein space. And then after that, you will see so if you were to draw a curve, you'll see a long tail of other alternative protein sources. There's a list of fava bean, all sorts of other proteins like duckweed, as you've identified, lentil protein, and so on. But these are not really today a big piece of the market share, and that there are reasons to each of them to why they haven't made they haven't taken a big piece of the market share. There is I think that going to what's next in line. So if we look today at the alternative protein space, I think pea is kind of still growing and still on an upward trajectory. But if we were to think of what's next, I think fava bean is an interesting one. It has a higher protein content than pea. So pea has about, let's say, about 20% protein. And I think fava gets to about 24% protein in the seed. And that affects the economics. Now, to be able to catch onto peas, some of the byproducts have to find markets. Like the fava bean starch has to have its market, similarly to the way pea starch has its market, but that's not the case today. There's no market for it, and the functionality is not really very clear on the fava starch. So still some development to happen. Then if we transition into something like the insect protein, we see very heavily today feeding insects on protein sources that are not desired for human consumption, and then using that for animal feed. So that's really the largest, as I have seen, the largest piece of where the insect protein is working. And there's still a test to be done on consumer acceptance of insect protein at scale. So that's still an uncertainty there in terms of what the market will do when that product hits it. At scale, not in a niche capacity. And then if we were to look at, so what does the future look like? If we were to look at what's an interesting something that I want to actually chase it for the 10-year horizon or beyond, or and then I would say that algae protein is an interesting one, and that is because in algae the byproduct is what's described as polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are commonly known as omega oils. So you get an organism that is able of producing good quality protein combined with high value byproduct, and that presents a very attractive economics case for another one. Yet the production mechanisms are still relatively challenging and not fully clear yet from a technical standpoint.
Yeah, and I love all the points that Zafer brought up. That he's absolutely right. I think like what we have to understand with, let's say, different protein sources, especially with the popular ones. So the ones like soy, wheat, gluten, and pea protein is that so they're widely studied, and we have a lot of data on their functionality. And with proteins, we always look at quantity and quality, in order to compare them. So, at the moment, soy has the highest protein quality in terms of the digestibility score. So that's how much of the protein that we can convert as humans, right? And then it also has, aside from that high quality protein, it also has the quantity. It has all the right functional characteristics and adaptability into many different food types. Of course, the issue with soy now is the allergenic properties. So some people might have allergies towards it. Pea protein, of course, is coming out as another contender because it has a very low allergenicity. It is showing a lot of great functional characteristics. However, with taste, there have been advances, but it's still, let's say, not as well accepted as soy in terms of taste. Going towards like the newer ones like fava bean, which is really great. I think what we still don't know is the quality of the protein in comparison. We don't have that much data. And then also, there are some issues to be considered with fava bean in terms of people with G6PD deficiency. So they're not able to convert certain proteins that are available. So this is also like an allergenic, but even more strong than like an allergy. So there might be some considerations for that. In terms of more neutral protein powders that are coming up, I think chickpea is one to look out for in the future. There have been a lot of advances and companies worldwide that are removing sort of the beanie taste. So that's another big contender. Also, I would also keep in mind that perhaps the protein quality is not as strong as soy. So, so what companies tend to do, to be able to first meet the right amino acid score as well as the digestibility score is they do that combination as well. So you'll always see, for instance, soy being mixed with wheat protein and maybe with rice, and they will try just to make sure that they can balance the right amino acid profile. Looking into let's say the future, you definitely have microalgae as a very strong contender, like for its very, let's say, high protein concentration. It's the quality is still yet to be tested, especially in terms of the functional characteristics. So that's like how it withstands high temperatures for cooking, baking, and then also all kinds of sort of emulsification, water soluble capacities, etc. So we still don't know how it will behave with different food sources. And then rightfully, as Zafer mentioned, with microalgae, what's interesting is that you have a lot of interesting micronutrients in combination, such as the polyunsaturated fatty acids. You also have like a couple of vitamins, minerals, iron, especially. So we are coming up with new sort of protein sources that if they are sort of tested enough, we will be able to see if they're equally as valuable as soy, or maybe even better.
Got it. And what about on the cost side in terms of cost to produce these different proteins? Do you see a big dispersion across these, and do you think that will change within the next few years? And maybe as a result of that, companies will start buying more of a certain kind of protein?
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely it's about supply and demand. They're already showing, for instance, like certain protein sources that are coming from, let's say, very low cost crops like mung protein, like mung bean protein, chickpea, might be let's say competitive to soy. But of course, in the meantime, soy is still the cheapest source. So I think it's all about it's just a matter of time and a matter of adoption. If enough people are looking for this protein, and it has shown to be like widely versatile as soy, then yeah, we might see that shift. But in the meantime, I think soy will still trump them all.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, and I think that soy will continue to sometime have solid advantages, and that the first one is soy is a GMO crop, so your yield per acre is higher. So that's going to be a key advantage. Then the second one, soy protein content at 36% is higher than you see in other legumes that are ranging between that 15 to 20%. So there is a big yield difference here in terms of the protein itself. So I think soy has the opportunity to continue to be a cost leader. But that's if you're comparing a GMO to a non-GMO. But if you go to the non-GMOs, then you'll see, as I mentioned, that chickpea could basically come up closer to the pea, or some of the other legumes trying to kind of creep up closer to the cost of the pea protein.
And what about on the supply chain side? We've seen some of the traditional meat producers be impacted by COVID. I'm curious to know whether you think that any of these plant-based proteins, whether the supply chains will be impacted by COVID, or maybe not the case.
I think that I can take this unless somebody else wants to.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
So I think that, so if we think about it, let's think about it from two sides. From farm to processing plant of the ingredient, that is typically done by truck, and that's about a small radius. I don't think there's been any disruption on that side. Then if you think about post-production processing or moving those ingredients or the finished goods, I think some of that has been, companies have incurred a higher shipping cost than they have traditionally, just because there's been so much demand on shipping. And then I think that if we are to see pressure on them, is probably as part of that pressure that was the quick serve restaurants like the McDonald's or the Burger Kings, who actually do carry some of these products, have witnessed a decline about 10% in their sales, I think, in the quarter. And so I think that this can be seen as part of that pressure that these quick serve restaurants have seen. I don't know anything about what's going on the grocery shelves. If these companies have seen any change in consumer preference during this period, I have no exposure to that at the moment.
Got it. Okay, and maybe just shifting topics a little bit and talking about cultured meat, which is a completely different kind of alternative protein. So maybe Dalal, you could talk a little bit about the regulatory environment for cultured meat. How does it differ between different regions, and what sort of trends do you see there?
Absolutely. Yeah, so this is a whole other ball game. You know, we really jumped topics. So I think, you know, I'm sure, you know, the audience is quite familiar, but for those who aren't, so this is really sort of the biotechnology component of, you know, utilizing, you know, stem cell technology to harvest, as well as, you know, proliferate and differentiate stem cells into animal cells that we would typically consume. In the meantime, most of the cell types are, you know, muscle tissue, connective tissue, even fat. So, you know, you do see this sort of combination of different cell types. But at the moment, of course, we're only able to sort of produce a minced meat, let's say, final end product. And you know, this sort of meat is now being, you know, formed into different patties, you know, in the form of chicken nuggets, beef balls, etc. Yes, I mean, this is still, like, you know, a very nascent industry. You know, we still don't have any scalable production to date. You know, we do have sort of a lot of companies worldwide that, you know, that have been sprouting, and, you know, they're all sort of working on very different, let's say, cell types. We have, of course, poultry companies now, seafood, as well as bovine, you know, cell types that are being grown for the future. But of course, you know, in terms of the regulatory hurdles, you know, there are so many. You know, it's everything from, you know, making sure that this is a scalable, safe product. So that means that all the sort of materials, the biomaterials, that are, you know, being used throughout the production process are, you know, safe for human consumption. And then, you know, it's not just that, it's also, you know, post-harvest, you know, once we harvest these tissues, something that scientists are really concerned about is that, you know, these tissues, they're grown in isolation of a living organism. So in that living organism, you have, you know, of course, a lot of bacteria, viruses, a lot of different pathogens, but there's a symbiosis in a living organism that doesn't affect these cells. So, you know, we're always curious that once they go through the post-harvest stage, how susceptible are they to any sort of contamination? And what type of, let's say, materials do we have to add to them to make sure that they don't get contaminated? You know, so of course, we always say that this is a clean industry. There's going to be no antibiotic use, but we still don't know the answer. I think there will be some combination, but a lot of these sort of cell-based companies, you know, are stating that a lot of these products are going to be immediately frozen. So you'll only be able to get them in their frozen form. It won't be sort of in your supermarkets, you know, just hanging as meat, you know, or you know, they won't be sort of sold in a chilled environment, but really in the frozen environment. Once we sort of even get past all these regulatory hurdles, we're not to, you know, we haven't sort of talked about the ethical, the consumer hurdles. You know, I had a conversation today with the Tim, the business innovation officer for Mosa Meat. So for those of you who don't know, Mosa Meat is the first cell-based company in the world. So something we discussed today was about sort of how do you sort of grab the attention of different religious groups, especially, you know, let's say groups that have their own certifications on meat, such as halal, such as kosher. What type of procedures would you have to take into consideration? So he said something very interesting. He said probably for them, what they would have to do is harvest cells from a slaughtered animal first that's been slaughtered by a halal process, by a kosher process, then grow those cells and then label them as cultured halal meat, which is kind of crazy. But these are all the, you know, different kinds of regulatory hurdles that we have to take consideration of. And there still might be many more that we can't foresee. Going forward, but definitely, you know, it's about making sure, number one, that it's safe for humans, it's safe for the environment. I mean, I haven't even talked about sort of the industrial output of this industry. Even though we all say it's clean, it's much better than, you know, say traditional animal husbandry or the animal slaughtering process. But, you know, everyone who has worked in a laboratory understands that chemical reagents are biohazardous. Right. So like we have to really make sure there's very clean and strict measurements put in place to dispose of these chemicals, to make sure that they're not having any harmful effect on the environment. And because, as I said, this is a nascent industry, we're all learning. And amazing people are working on this sector: bioprocessing engineers, scientists, cell biologists. So it's really going to be a huge feat once we do find a way to produce this sustainably, ethically, and environmentally, and in a environmentally sound way. So yeah, definitely, I would encourage everyone to read up about it and really find ways that we can make this a better system.
Mm-hmm. And what about on the production side? We saw the first lab-grown burger that was produced for, I think, $600,000 or $300,000. What do you see in terms of the actual cost to production? Has that come down? And what are the main actual bottlenecks in the process? Is it maybe around the bioreactors, or are there some other aspects of the production process that are just not very, not very scalable currently?
Yeah, yes. So to answer your first point about the price points, so absolutely, the price has definitely gone down. From the early days. I know that the figures, they always sort of fluctuate. You can't really find or pinpoint the right sort of numbers. From my reading, I think the first price points were like $18,000 per pound. I know that Memphis Meats have got it down to 2,000, through their first sort of innovations, and sort of scaling the technology. Right now, I know, for instance, the company just announced late last year that their chicken nugget, so per chicken nugget, they got the price down to $50. And I know, from speaking to different cultured meat companies, they all say that their initial products, once they scale, are going to be the price of premium meat, most likely. And then, it will just take time, for them to really get the price points down. I think, in terms of the production method, the largest pain point is definitely the media. The media for two reasons. One, of course, for the cost. So what people have to understand is, the media that we're currently using, or that's the gold standard for cell culture, is FBS, which is fetal bovine serum. So this is derived from an animal source. So ethically, it doesn't really sit well with a lot of cultured meat companies. At the same time, it was traditionally produced for the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sector, which is used for for medtech or medical science. So the quality and the grade was very, very high. So there was a very high price point as well. So that's been a great challenge. And you can really see now that a lot of cell-based companies are trying to produce their own FBS alternative. And of course, there are alternatives for sort of the traditional sort of horticulture for plant cell culture, but we still don't know what is going to be equally efficient for animal cells, and what can help them grow efficiently. So you've seen there are companies that are doing sort of peptide systems. There's companies that are producing sort of different kinds of I would call them I guess adapters to help the cells bind and attach to the petri dish to help them with their proliferation. So everything to aid them with their proliferation. But that steady media, we're still trying to solve that issue. What can we create that is equally as efficient as FBS? And I think once they are able to produce that, the price points will go down significantly. But it's definitely going to take time, especially once they start scaling the technology. And I mean, a lot of these materials are quite expensive. From the scaffolding, from the bioreactor system. So it's definitely going to take some time, but I think FBS right now is just really the brunt of all the problems because it is animal sourced. So this is really going to be the first challenge that everyone wants to tackle.
I see.
Yeah, very true. I think some are even working on recycling the media as part of the solution, or finding an alternative synthetic form of the media. But yeah, definitely media is a huge cost point. And then I think that there is a little bit of work on the nature of the cells that are grown. So what you have in normal meat is a combination of fat cells and muscle cells. And I think that some of that design is now leaning towards trying to grow or have both in the finished product in order to mimic the actual muscle taste and not taste just like a very dry piece of meat.
Okay, great. Well, maybe just the last topic before we open it up to questions. And Matthew, I know you in particular have looked more at getting products onto the shelves and looking at the nutrition side. So we have a number of entrepreneurs and founders, co-founders in the audience. I'd be really curious to know if there are any kind of common stumbling blocks or any just maybe more general advice that you would give to the founders of these plant companies. It could be around the production process or the nutrition side, the content of their own product. And Matthew, I know you have a little bit more experience there.
Yeah. So what I know from currently is yes, you can get very innovative in terms of developing new products in the test kitchen or in the lab. So this is really a good place where you can put in a lot of ideas to create a new product in terms of create a new emulsion using different plant-based protein and ingredients. But that's always the difficulties or the challenge is to increase the scalability. So how you can scale the product from a test kitchen to a manufacturing scale, this is always the tricky portion because you have to look into the processing as well. Like for instance, are you going to adopt the extrusion as part of your process, or you have to think about other alternatives like looking into pasteurization or sterilization? So what sort of process you're looking into? So this is something to consider while you do your product development in the test kitchen, because looking in the test kitchen, you have very simple equipments like a food processor, a cooker, oven to really produce your product. Looking into a huge scale of quantity, you have to think of are you looking into a commercial oven, or are you looking into some thermal process, a retort process to help you to scale your product? And also that's always the challenge for you to identify the different process that you're going to adopt. And another question is also the manufacturing co-manufacturer that is in the market. Yes, typically they are all meat producer. Like for instance, if you are doing a plant-based meat alternative, you need equipment that is quite similar to a meat manufacturer. So this is something, an issue, how you could balance out to engage this co-manufacturer and how to establish a system with them so that they can use their equipment to produce their product for you, and also to meet their requirements for a plant-based product, because you wouldn't want your product to be a plant-based product, but yet it has contains traces of meat inside. So this is something to address the issue. So I would say that yes, have to spend a lot of time and thoughts in terms of your co-manufacturing and how to do the upscale, because typically we have to manage the process and also the quality, because doing a small scale in the like in the kitchen, you're able to control the quality of the product, the taste of the product. But if you're looking into a large quantity, it's very difficult for you to maintain the same quality that you produce in the test kitchen or in a smaller scale. So yeah, you always have to find a balance between the process and how you want to use this process to at least to achieve a quality and texture of the product that is acceptable to you. So you still have to run a lot of sensory as well, like focus group, to understand what the consumer needs, and then proceed with sensory after your scaling up, so that you can understand how much changes the process has caused on your product, and whether the consumers still deem this as a good product, because it takes a long way for consumer to understand what the consumer wants and what the consumer is looking for in a product. So I think this is something, an area that the company is worth to put in some time to look into, to spend some time to understand what the consumer needs, and as well to look into how you want to scale your process, and also to ensure that at the end of it, your product tastes good, and also it's nutritionally good as well. So you can think about refortify your product with nutrition, the nutrients that you are required, or you can, during your process, try to think of a way to retain the nutritional aspect of it. But maybe don't go for a harsh thermal process, probably can go for a pressure processing. So there's something, some ideas that you can think about during your scale up process. Yeah.
Got it. Great. So we have just under 10 minutes left in the panel. So I'm going to now open some of the questions that we've got from the audience. And we can start with the first one, which is coming from Roger Spillman. And his question is, I would love to know your thoughts on hemp protein.
I think that he commented also about the essential amino acids, and then so I think hemp protein in general is a good quality protein. I think hemp in itself is becoming a very attractive crop for production and processing, just because hemp oil as well as a byproduct is an interesting and seeing a big market. I think it's rich in CBDs, and that is driving a lot of that demand for it. The protein quality, I think it's indicated that hemp is rich in the essential amino acids, which is good. But the reality of it is, I don't think consumers really have today the knowledge or the differentiation. I don't know if consumers today actually differentiate based on amino acid content. Because if you compare, going back to the point that I raised, if you compare pea protein versus soy protein, actually soy protein is a higher quality protein in terms of digestibility and amino acid balance than pea protein. But pea protein is a higher price protein because it's perceived as a healthier source of protein. And so I think that hemp is in a place where it's going to have some market share. Do I think that hemp will actually have a huge market share? I think it has still some limitations in terms of the acreage. So I don't believe hemp has comparable acreage or anywhere near pea or soy or some of the other alternatives. And then the second piece of it is that I think hemp will be a premium protein in comparison to the ones that are driving on the commercial scale at the mainstream.
Got it. And we have the next question. It's from Matt Guevara. He asks, what does the market for soy byproduct look like, as in starch, and specifically around the largest buyers, the industries, and the use cases?
Okay, I think, yeah, in general, yeah, there is a sort of a big movement of like how to utilize all components, especially after the extraction process. I think, for soy starch, maybe, there of course will be a lot of like applications, but I think in general, companies, or let's say consumers, are moving towards, let's say, more high protein products, and also you can also see this trend of utilizing protein as a fat replacer. I think, Dr. Matthew, we discussed this once, like some of the potentials of this as well. Like, I mean, there's just such a high versatility of protein, and of course, I'm sure there is that utility that we're trying to utilize every single component, but I don't think it's in line with the trends. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Matthew, on this point.
Yeah, so this one I heard of this from my friends, that they are looking into the byproduct from soy. So it's like, for instance, in Asia context, they use soy typically to make tofu. So once they create the tofu, there is a lot of waste of the soy after the process. So we know that some research has been done to collect this the waste from the tofu, and they use this waste, probably there's nutrients inside, there's sugars and starch inside, which is very applicable for them to use for fermentation. So they use this product and go through another fermentation process to produce products such as beer and alcoholic products. So this is something that they try to make, utilize the waste of the soy. So I would say that depends on the content of the waste. If it's high amount of like starch or carbohydrates, that's easy, is allowed for fermentation. They can identify all this and then to adopt additional process to produce another product. So this is, I think there's a company in Singapore that also run fermentation process to produce liquor or alcohol or even beer using the soy byproduct from it. So it's easy for them to get the byproduct because tofu manufacturers, they normally discard all this byproduct, so they're able to get it at a relatively low price, but yet going through a fermentation, they're able to sell it at a premium price as a beer or alcoholic product, which is add value to a waste product. So there's something that some companies are looking at to add value to the waste.
Yeah, I think, do you remember that company, Matthew, the one that was also doing the umami salt from the soy by process?
Yeah, I think he also uses so soy sauce is also very popular in the Asia context. So this soy company, we managed to talk to him before. Is he runs a soy sauce business, and they realized that there's a lot of soy waste from it. So they uses this soy waste. They do some identification to characterize what are the balance for the waste, and then they realize that they have this component from the waste that can enhance the umami-ness of a product. So they use additional process to filter, to reprocess the waste, and then to extract the umami-ness or the flavor from it, and use this as a seasoning powder for products. Like they can make it into additional seasoning for your meat, for your dishes as well. So this is something they are one of the company that we talk to as well, that have this idea of using the soy waste as to increase the umami flavor of a product.
So I think that, and Matthew, maybe this is also, please feel free to jump in. The major driver of the economics of the soy is really the oil and the protein. That's really the key financial drivers of the processing itself. And then any other applications are contributors to that economics, but the base economics is really driven by the protein and oil. Is that consistent with what you are seeing as well?
Yep, that's true, because the oil and protein is typically the one that everyone wants to extract and wants to get from it to produce it. So yes, it's very true in our side as well, where these are something as a valuable ingredient that they wanted, but typically right now they look into the other end, is they also want to know how to use the waste from it, because getting the fats and protein from like soybean, typically the leftover is something of a use that they can produce another product from it.
Very interesting.
Great, and we have just 1 minute left, so maybe just very quickly from Randy Allen, he asks, do you think the winning protein ingredient will be a mix of currently used proteins or a novel tasteless protein with a PDCAAS of 1? Maybe Zafer, you might take that one.
I think that we should all pitch in. I think that, quickly, I think that some of the existing proteins have a PDCAAS score of 1. Soy is actually an example of that. So I think that PDCAAS score of 1 is nothing novel. And I do think that a question is dependent on the horizon that you're looking at. I think if you're looking at the next 5 years, I don't see the landscape changing in an explosive way unless cultured meat makes some breakthrough on its cost points and then comes in really heavy. But from a plant-based proteins or insect and fungal, I would say the mix is likely to continue to be what we're working with today, which is soy, pea, and potentially adding another 1 or 2 plant-based sources. That would be my view.
Yeah, I think in terms of the PDCAA is the protein digestibility score. So I think, like, from my reading, the soy was like 0.91. So 1 is typically for animal protein. That's like from my reading, but I think definitely, my theory is that we're going to still push towards a very bland, neutral protein extract. This is something that we're all going to crave going forward, especially once companies start to manipulate it into their different shapes and forms. They want it to be very versatile and also to be able to add all their different flavoring components. So I think we are doing great things with soy, with pea, But definitely, I do see chickpea sort of gaining momentum in this space, especially for its protein quality, as well as sort of the extracts that are now coming out that are bland. You can also see a lot of companies that are working on bitter blockers. So that's like trying to remove the bitter sort of beanie tastes from other legumes. So I think definitely there is always going to be a price issue. So if the like let's say low costing crops like mung bean, like chickpea can gain momentum, there might be a chance for them to succeed. But yeah, we will still have to wait and see for sure.
Got it. Well, thank you very, very much to all three of you, and especially Dalal and Matthew. I know it's very late where you are, so really appreciate you making the time for us, and Zafer as well. So that's the conclusion of the Breakthroughs in Proteins panel. Thanks for joining, and the next panel will be starting momentarily.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Thanks.